McDermott is the registrar for the probate court for the county, and he visits us usually at least once a year to provide a really great presentation where he covers things like the Homestead Act and very interesting things for seniors about probate court. So I'm so glad you were willing to join us virtually this way and provide some information to our seniors. I'm sure they're interested how you guys are operating at this time as well. So I'll give you the floor.
Thanks, Carrie and Debbie and everybody that's joining on the call today, and for Joanne DePietro for setting up this interaction with us today. And as we said before, I love coming out at least once a year to come individually to see everybody at the Council on Aging. I think last year was the first time I was at the new facility, which I found fascinating. It was awesome. Got a little tour. It's amazing what we're doing for our seniors in our local communities these days, and I'm excited about it to see all the activities. And unfortunately, under these circumstances, you know, we don't have that interactive opportunity, and it affects all of us, whether we're seniors or I see it happening with my 2 teenage kids who are faced without being able to hang out with their friends either. So we are social creatures, and I think that unfortunately under these circumstances we've all been put in a position that it hurts, and certainly every agency, every business has been affected by this. Government services have been certainly affected, and we're not quite sure. And unfortunately, there's no playbook for this crisis. You know, we haven't faced this thing ever in our lifetime. So a lot of the decisions that are being made right now are being made with an abundance of caution for people's health and safety. And I think we'll all learn from this, hopefully, that we won't have to deal with it again. But if we ever do have to deal with something like this again, that we will have the experience that is necessary to do it. Just to give you a little background, quick background for those of you who don't know me. So I'm Patrick McDermott. I've served as the Register of Probate for Norfolk County for the last 18 years. I'm a past president of the Norfolk County Bar Association. So I've had the opportunity to work with hundreds, if not thousands, of lawyers across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts on developing programs, outreach programs to help local members of the community on various issues. Prior to that, I served as a city councilor in the city of Quincy. I am an attorney myself, and it's been a passion of mine to serve in public service. I've served up the State House, worked in the legislature for a couple of years. I worked in the county of Norfolk. Even though I'm the elected Register of Probate for Norfolk County, my position is actually with the trial court of Massachusetts. But I did work for the county back in 2000 to 2002. I worked over at the Registry of Deeds. Oftentimes I'm confused sometimes with the Register of Deeds, who's my good friend Billy O'Donnell, who talks about, usually I know he goes out as well to talk with the councils on aging about Homestead Acts and other real estate matters. Frauds, mortgage scams. But so Billy and I are friends, but oftentimes we're confused with titles. So I'm over there as the Register of Probate, running the probate and family court. So the things that we deal with predominantly are family court issues, mostly on one side of the aisle, as I say, is our family law section in terms of child custody, child support, divorce, restraining orders. We do adoptions at the court, which are really wonderful. On the other side of the aisle, we deal with our probates, which is the estate administration cases. It's been a joy to be doing that for 18 years, and I will be retiring technically at the end of this year, not necessarily from public service, but from the probate and family court to run for sheriff in Norfolk County, and that can be a subject for another time. But as of right now, the way that the court is operating, and it's been very difficult only because we deal with literally hundreds of cases a week. And we usually have anywhere from 600 to 800 people a week coming into the probate and family court in Canton for various issues. And when this crisis hit and we shut down on March 16th, all of those cases had to be rescheduled. We had to get really creative on how we handle emergency cases, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the emergencies that we've been dealing with. But you know, the life does go on in these circumstances, and people still need to get access to our court system. So we had to get really creative in terms of how people could get access. And Utilizing technology is our best thing to do because that in-person contact is precluded because of the health regulations right now. And we've been trying to figure out how to reopen. But we created a hotline. We ended up having the ability to have half of our staff at any given time in the court. So I have 2 different teams that are now set up. So I have one team in this week. My other team will come in next week. They've been taking 1 week on, 1 week off. Some folks are able to work from home, checking our voicemail and things like that. So we've fielded, we lost count after the first few weeks, but thousands of phone calls have come into our hotline for people looking for information on their particular case, or how do I go about doing X, Y, and Z? Are you accepting new filings? We've been able to stay virtually open throughout the course, with the exception of 2 emergency shutdowns because of positive COVID tests of our employees, by the virtual opportunities that are afforded to us by our hotline as well as our email. We actually have kept a running count of our emails, and we've answered over 4,200 emails have come in since March 16th, when this crisis first hit. We've had to triage our cases, so not every case is an emergency. If somebody is filing for divorce, you can wait to get divorced unless you're getting remarried again. We've had a few of those. A few people are getting divorced and they're getting remarried within a short period of time. So we got to figure out a way to facilitate that. But unfortunately, the crisis situations that we're dealing with right now, which are truly sad, and they are horrific crises. Domestic violence has spiked. It's unfortunate because it's always steady in terms of the domestic violence issues that are going on, but they've ramped up as people have been in isolation. I don't know if you've read recently the tragic, horrific murder that took place in Dover, where a prominent doctor strangled his wife and disposed of the body in a pond. That case was in the Norfolk Probate Court. They were in the process of getting divorced, and there was a restraining order in place out of the Dedham District Court. To his credit, Norfolk County District Attorney Mike Morrissey refused to drop the charges. And in the cases of domestic violence, the biggest problem is making sure that the victim is safe and secure, and the psychological damage that is done by the perpetrator against the victim of domestic violence puts them in a situation where they will convince themselves that he won't do it again to me, that we can solve this problem on our own. And we saw that in the case of the Dover case. The victim, sadly, the wife, was moving to dismiss the restraining order out of Dedham District Court, and basically saying that everything's fine, we've resolved everything. And to his credit, District Attorney Morrissey and his domestic violence team did not dismiss the charge. They kept it open. Just to make sure that it would be in place and that there would be consistent court monitoring of the case. Same thing was going on in my court, is that the parties had agreed to dismiss the divorce because they had reconciled. And it's just a tragic circumstance that unfortunately that case ended so poorly and badly that a woman lost her life. But that's the tragedies that we deal with. We accept probably 3 to 5 restraining orders a day right now that are coming into our court with families, with mostly women who are now having to flee their home, find a shelter, go live with their parents or a friend, and we make sure that those are heard expeditiously. We normally by telephone. We don't have the in-person hearings going on, but we do telephonic hearings, and all the judges now have a Zoom license to have Zoom hearings. And my biggest concern is the Register is a keeper of record to make sure that those records are preserved. So the oral testimony that people give, we have to make sure it's recorded and properly stored at the courthouse, and we make sure that happens. The other emergencies that we're dealing with right now are mostly related to child custody issues, especially since COVID-19 crisis hit. When children were in between visitations or parenting with one parent over the other, some parents refused to return their children to the other parent, to the custodial parent. So we've had to have many interactions with local police departments. In fact, they had a couple of calls out of Walpole, and unfortunately, a couple of cases there. A lot of Quincy, Randolph, Weymouth cases that the police are involved, because it can get to the level of a parental kidnapping case when parents are withholding the children from the other side. So we've had to dive into those cases, interact with our local police departments, bring in some social workers to help mediate the case and make sure those children are in the right spot. Child support is a big issue too. Unfortunately, it doesn't rise to the level of an emergency yet. The sad, tragic thing about COVID-19 is when we look about the unemployment rate that's skyrocketed over the last few weeks. There are millions of people right now out of work, and that has a direct impact on families. And when the payor of child support loses his or her job, their ability to pay child support is diminished unless they can get on unemployment. But even then, that's usually at a significantly lower rate. So we've allowed all those folks to at least file their petitions to modify their child support orders in order for us to move on and at least get a temporary order in place so that they can at least get some relief in the first instance. Finally, and unfortunately, it is the most difficult thing that I've had to deal with, I think, since being the Register of Probate, is sadly on a day-to-day basis. We look at the statistics of the COVID crisis, and unfortunately, it's our senior population that is most vulnerable, and in particular, the seniors who are living in nursing homes. And sadly, my day job, when I start, unfortunately, what we used to love to do when the public was, we started our days off with adoptions. Unfortunately, every day now, we have at least 2 or 3, sometimes up to 5 cases that are filed for do not resuscitate cases. And sadly, it's people, mostly our senior population, who have succumbed to this disease. Nursing homes are filing them on behalf of families. And it's a tragic, tragic thing to have to go through as a family, to know that A, you can't be with your loved one in their time of need, and B, that you're making a decision that you'd never want to have to make, and that's to end your loved one's life. And that's the sad, tragic thing that we have to deal with. And when there's no ability for a person, when they're in the hospital or in a nursing home, to make that decision on their own. And this is what I always, I usually make sure I give this speech on good times and bad. Certainly this is a bad time. Making sure that your estate is properly done, and that includes not just your will and trust, but that healthcare proxy. It's usually 1 or 2, sometimes Joanne probably has a 3 or 4 page healthcare proxy, maybe, because she's very thorough. And you want a thorough document that you want to make sure that in the event that you're incapacitated during your life, that you have somebody appointed who can make those decisions on your behalf. But you get to delineate within that document how and what you want done in the event that you're incapacitated. Most people will say, we all say, in fact, we had to talk about this over the weekend with some family members, and we talk, nobody wants to suffer. And so they always say, hey, don't allow me to suffer. And there's legal language that people put in their healthcare proxy to make sure that in the event that they're going through a situation where it's medically the right decision to make, and if you delineate that within your healthcare proxy, that I do not want to have artificial means of keeping me alive, then that's what you put in that proxy. And it alleviates a huge burden on our loved ones to know that we've properly vetted our own decision-making process, and that there's a document in place to allow it to happen. Because tragically, under these circumstances, it's when we're not prepared, and that's what we see at the court, is folks that haven't prepared properly, and families aren't able to figure it out, and the burden is on them. It's on a loved one to make those decisions, and sometimes, sadly, with some cases, they don't have any family at all. So it's technically the judge, it's the court that's making these decisions in what's in the best interest. It's a substituted judgment. What would that individual want for their decision under those circumstances? So we're still closed technically until June 1st. But I think we're still not going to allow the public in through probably into July or maybe August. So we're in a position now that we really need to ramp up our virtual presence through hearings that are run by Zoom, through our online e-filing process. So if people need to file documents, they'll file with us electronically. And we have to ramp up our customer service in terms of it. Right now, I only have 2 people that are actively answering the phones, returning those voicemails. But unfortunately, we're behind because of the volume of people, the nervousness and the questions that people have, which are all great questions that need answers. So I'm remarkably very proud of my staff. I'm proud of what they've been able to accomplish under these really tough situations. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'm honored to be here today, and it's a tough circumstance, and I can certainly appreciate each and every one of you. As I can see you on the screen here, we're all facing the same issues together, and it's nice to be able to have this technology in place that we can see each other's faces and share each other's concerns. And I've been on a couple of calls too, because the most important thing too is hopefully we can all do too is celebrate how joy and how grateful we are for the things that we do have in our life. So,
Pat, if I may, I'd like to make 2 points. First of all, I'm probably biased by saying this, but I do have to say that the Norfolk Division of the Probate Court is one of the best probate courts that we work with. We do a lot of probate administration, and Pat has exemplified leadership at that court, most particularly with the support staff. They're always extremely helpful. So if you, like Pat said, if you ever have questions, once we get back to that so-called normalcy, they're always willing to help. Pat, last week we had a Zoom meeting on healthcare proxies and living will declarations. So you basically reiterated, capsulized what we spoke of last week. One of the things that I'd like you to just touch upon just a little bit is, in addition to the healthcare proxy, we also always highly recommend a durable power of attorney. And people will ask me why they need it. If all my accounts are joint with my spouse or with my child, why do I need it? And the long story short is, if you don't have a durable power of attorney, effectively, we may have to go and get a guardianship or conservatorship, which is also within your jurisdiction. Would you mind touching upon that just for a little bit?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely you want to, that's part of your affairs when you want to put those things together: durable power of attorney, your healthcare proxy, your will. In the event that, we have 2 types of cases, and they're very similar. And they're guardianship cases as well as conservator cases. One deals with power over the legal affairs of an individual, and the other one deals with the financial affairs. So the guardianship process is when that durable power of attorney isn't in place, that healthcare proxy is not in place. And if in fact you become incapacitated, somebody, normally a loved one, sometimes it's a professional guardian, would have to petition the court to have somebody appointed to actually act on your behalf. And there's a whole range of that too. We have limited guardianships, because there's a very specific element that individuals might not be able to take care of certain types of their affairs. But the vast majority are general guardianships that somebody's is facing Alzheimer's or severe brain injuries that gives them an inability to function, that they are truly incapacitated. The difficulty with those cases, and the conservatorship is just the same thing, but regarding finances. So if you're managing money for people, you're managing a business, sometimes that's the case. The difficulty in these things too is because we need, the whole concept of a guardianship is we are actually adjudicating somebody incapacitated and taking away their ability to make decisions on their own behalf. And that's a high bar for a judge and a court to do. I mean, we're taking away your rights and giving it to somebody else to make decisions on your behalf. So we make sure that with all those guardianship papers, you need that a medical affidavit has to be filed with that case. So a doctor would typically make a medical evaluation of the individual to test their physical and their psychological ability to manage their own affairs. And if the medical certificate recommends that they cannot do so, then we move forward on appointing somebody. Now, there's checks and balances on all of this stuff. When a person is appointed guardian, they need to file with us a guardian care plan report. So it's not like, you just give that a person's rights are totally taken away. The court remains very active on that. And it's as simple as we want to make sure that the proper medication is being used for people who are being medicated specifically on antipsychotic medication. We have a whole wing of the law regarding antipsychotic meds. So guardians are required to file with us their 60-day care plan report, and then annually a care plan report on what is happening in the life of the person that they're managing. And similarly on the conservator stuff, that we need to know how you're managing the person's money. So, and that came after a result of, and I think I was registered. It was early on in my tenure as registered. I think it was back in 2004. The Globe had done a Globe Spotlight team had done a series on elderly abuse cases, and there was a bunch of cases that came out of, I believe, there was some in Norfolk, but predominantly out of Suffolk and Middlesex County, where there were some professional guardians that were actually, bilking and robbing the seniors under their care. And so that's what kicked in these guardian care plan reports and made the court a little bit more involved in those cases than they had been in the past. But certainly this all happens too because the proper planning hasn't been done. If proper planning is in place by an individual, then court intervention is not needed. But we get you through it, and certainly we have a great guardianship clinic prior to us closing down. Once again, we have a bunch of programs at the probate court. All of them that I've started over the course of the years, and one of them I'm most proud of is our guardianship clinic. So when folks are facing a situation where their loved one is in need of guardianship, a lot of times it's drug related too. A lot of times we have parents raising their grandparents raising their grandchildren because unfortunately a drug addicted mom or dad. So we put together, once again, I threw it out to my friends at the bar associations, and we got a whole list of volunteer lawyers who come in every Wednesday at the court to counsel families on the guardianship process and how the paperwork gets filed and what their requirements are. So we want to make sure that the probate and family court is the people's court and you get access to it because, as I used to say on the campaign trail, out of all the elected officials that you are going to have some kind of interaction with over the course of your time, other than your local folks like the Board of Selectmen and maybe your state rep, the Register of Probate is probably one that you or a loved one is definitely going to have interaction with over the course of their time. So I wanted to make sure that all of the cases that I handle, whether it's the adoptions, change of names, guardianships, divorces, domestic violence cases, that there was some kind of program and access to assistance for the constituents I represent. Because coming to court is intimidating. And we want to make sure that at least that experience is less intimidating for you than it would have been had you not been able to have access to help. So that was probably a long-winded answer on Joanne's question, but gave me an opportunity to tell.
No, that was perfect. And that really exemplifies the fact that if you have particular estate planning documents in place, you can alleviate a lot of stress, a lot of time, a lot of effort and money to, make things happen. While, once you've lost capacity and you've appointed your fiduciary, then you can trust that fiduciary to make the appropriate decisions for you under those documents.
Yeah, and I look, and it's funny because we, nobody likes to pay for an attorney until you really need one. But I look at hiring an attorney out there as similar to buying insurance. Yeah. A lot of times. I mean, there are some reactionary things that one needs an attorney for. If God forbid you get in a drunk driving accident, you're gonna have to hire an attorney to represent you. But there's so many services that an attorney provides, especially in the realm of elder law and estate planning, that the investment that a person makes in hiring a lawyer to do a simple estate or complex, especially as we're getting older, I just got my AARP card because I turned 50 this year, so I'm excited about the next generation for myself going forward. I'm sporting a white beard going on in COVID land. The investment that one makes in an attorney in terms of doing like Medicare planning, unfortunately, as we get older and God forbid we do have to go into a nursing home, the nursing home are going to require you to pay down your whatever assets you have, and that could include the family home and all your bank accounts, all your things that you have in your possession in order to pay for your long-term care. And so that's where both the insurance stuff comes in, but also if you hire an attorney to do proper estate planning to help you protect those assets for your family. So hiring a great attorney, and that's why even though we have the services of the court that help you more on the reactionary, I need the help, I need to do something. I always find that if people invest up front, you save yourself an enormous amount of heartache and financial loss in the long term. So this is technically, now I'm trying to, in Walpole, do you guys, is this the appointed board of the Council on Aging, or is this just anybody that wants to chime in?
Right, anybody. These are members of the Council on Aging. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, they've been doing some meetings.
Pat, you said something very earlier that some people get like remarried. So do you find that there are like a lot of people that do get remarried, or do they spread out and they marry, say, somebody else other than their original spouse?
It's funny because I probably should have been writing my notes down over the last 18 years because there's so many different interesting scenarios that have come up on every type of law. And the marriage stuff was kind of interesting because we have had numerous examples of people that go through the probate court, they get divorced, and come to find out they get remarried again to each other. After they've been divorced, they've lived apart, and they figure out that they really were in love, but they just hadn't had the connection during the time. We do have a lot of folks, and it is the folks that do come in, they need to get divorced because they're getting remarried. It's like, wait a minute, they've moved on already before like the ink is dry on the divorce papers. And the problem is too that people don't realize that even though you go before the judge and you get divorced on, let's say today, there is a waiting period. Statutory in Massachusetts, a waiting period before 180 days, 90 days before you can get actually get divorced. They call it the cooling off period. So just in the case one of the parties wants to renege on the divorce, they can go back into the court and try to get it fixed. But because we've had people, they come in and they say, I'm getting married in Aruba next week and I'm looking to get divorced. I'm like, it's just not going to happen. And once again, bad planning on people's part. But it happens. And so there's all kinds of those stories going on. I had a story of a person that was getting divorced so that he could marry his wife's sister. Gotta love that one. That would have been an interesting Thanksgiving, I guess. But it does. It gets wild and wacky at the probate court sometimes. And it is a sad place on a lot of the things we do. So we have to find a little bit of humor here and there as things come up.
So like people aren't supposed to marry like within a family, against the biblical laws.
But it's against the laws of the Commonwealth too. So there are laws that are in place. You can't marry your sister or your brother. I forget to what level. I think it goes as far as I don't think you can marry your cousin either. But I think there's once it goes beyond your first cousin, I think technically like second cousin, you probably have a shot at that if you're interested. But yeah, the laws of the Commonwealth have adopted a lot of religious laws of whether it's the Old or the New Testament, and certainly the 10 Commandments have all been codified for the most part, including "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife" is technically called adultery. And and that is a law of the Commonwealth. That's still on the books today. I don't think that's ever been repealed, even though nobody gets prosecuted for cheating on their spouse. But it is, I think, a law that you could technically, it's a crime, so you can be prosecuted for it. but doesn't get that much press, I don't think.
I want to be conscientious of your time, though, Mr. McDermott, and see if there's any other questions as they relate to probate for Mr. McDermott today. Oh, Mr. Byrne, make sure you're off mute. There you go.
Thank you for the discussion. Really enjoyed it. Have a question. When it comes to the impact of probate, what is better, a will or a trust, whether it be a revocable or irrevocable trust? But there seems to be some, I guess, comments or issues regarding a trust is better than a will with respect to avoiding any complications relevant to probate.
Yep. So there's various different techniques in terms of estate planning and asset protection, for that matter. So you really need a little bit of everything. I mean, I always say everybody needs that basic package of your will, your healthcare proxy, durable power of attorney. Trust is a different portion. A trust is an opportunity for you to create a document that can manage your property while you're alive, and it determines what happens after you're passed away, and it stays outside of probate, because it's a living document that if you, for instance, like a revocable will versus an irrevocable will, and there's some discussion as to what's the best technique, for instance, to avoid some of those nursing home issues relative to Medicare planning. So a revocable will means I make a will, which is an instrument that says I'm making this trust, I'm going to put stuff into it, but I reserve the right to tear up the trust and take the property back. It is a vehicle by which it can manage property, and it also talks about if I die, then it goes to my kids, it goes to my spouse. So it's an instrument that works during your life, and it determines what happens after you pass away, without having to go to probate, because the document itself discusses it. A will versus an irrevocable will is I make my will and I can't take it back. So that's usually the vehicle that it's not my understanding that is used sometimes on the Medicare planning, because they have that 5-year look back provision. Did you actually own the property or not? So therefore, if it's put into a trust over 5 years, then it's a good transfer of property, and it's protected from the nursing homes. Trusts do avoid the need to come to the probate court, but I always say that coming to probate is not like the worst case scenario out of things. As Joanne talked about earlier, and I have a great staff at Norfolk. Inevitably you're gonna miss something unless you're a real perfect planner, and none of us are. Inevitably, there's going to be a bank account or a retirement account or some stocks that you forgot to put a beneficiary on. It just happens, even with the best of planners. So that will at least protects that stuff. And the will itself, like a trust, talks about what needs to be done with my property, who's going to manage it, who's going to be the personal representative of the estate once I pass away, similar to the trustee while I'm alive, and who gets my stuff after I'm gone. And wills as well as trusts, it's how particular you want it to be. And that's another whole book. I have to write a book series, because I think that some of the wills that I've read get very funky. As the one I allowed yesterday was very particular. It was a woman that owned like a bunch of animals, and she, Sherry the cat goes to my good friend Linda. The dog, the hamster. It was a series of pets. So people in the wills get very particular. But there's nothing wrong with one or the other. They're two very separate vehicles, and it's about how best to plan your estate, meaning while you're alive as well as what happens after you pass away. So a will should be part of everybody's estate. And I'll qualify this by saying, yes, a will should be part of everybody's plan. Trusts, not so much. Trusts are really particular if you need the trust. And that's where a qualified attorney like Joanne would come in and talk to you yourself, because they're all individual. You couldn't put a blanket answer across the board to everybody here and say, oh yeah, you all need a trust. It really is based on your individual needs, what assets you have, what assets you need to protect. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. And it can be very different, especially if you own multiple businesses. That's another issue. Corporations, are a whole separate issue. If you own a business and if you have it in an LLC versus a trust. So that's where the attorneys come in handy. But everybody needs a will, period. And that's the one thing I will always say is not everybody needs a trust.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So Pat, let me ask you then, if somebody dies and does not have a will,
Mhm.
then what happens?
So we call that an intestate estate. So when one dies without a will, the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts kick in, which specifically delineates who can be appointed to represent your estate. And there's what we call a priority ladder.
But if your wife is still living,
Yep. So
And
basically, it comes down to if you're married, and let's say married with children.
I don't have any children, so if I pass away,
Yep.
then does my wife inherit everything that I own?
If you don't have a will, your wife is the heir at law, and she is the highest priority to be appointed to represent your estate without a will.
Okay.
So the laws dictate. So it's like if you die without a spouse, but children, then your children are the next ones in line to take over, individually or collectively. And that's the thing. And if you die without a spouse and no children, we go back up the chain of command to, are your parents still alive? If parents aren't alive anymore, then it goes out to your siblings. No siblings, nieces and nephews. And then that's where it starts to get a little funky. If you die without wife, no kids, no parents, no siblings, then it gets a little bit hairy because there's usually multiple heirs. And that's where we see things. In fact, there's lawyers and I call them the treasure hunters that make a pretty good living on folks that don't do any planning and die without any heirs. I had an estate come in within the last year, which was just under $10 million, and the person had no one, just had 10 million bucks, and they found, I think there was like 80 heirs, and it was a person, I think they were from the I want to say like Czechoslovakia or Hungary or something like that. And they came over here. It was, I think it was a person in Brookline, died, left an enormous estate and just didn't care. Just was like, hey, live life to the fullest. And what happens after, I can't take it with me. You guys figure it out. And they had the heir hunters, as I call them. They hunt down the heirs through genealogy, research, and they found all these heirs all over Eastern Europe. And so there was like 80 heirs that were able to split they didn't even know the guy, but they're entitled to the property. And the heir searchers, the ones that hunt these things down, they actually get a nice piece of the pie too, because what they do, they hunt down all the heirs and they send you, now people get letters like this all the time. And unfortunately, I don't blame people for thinking they're a scam, and they should always call the court or call an attorney to help them with it, because what the heir finders do, and they usually do it through their own attorney, they'll send you a letter and say, hey, Mr. Burns, I've uncovered an asset that you're entitled to for up to $30,000, and you need to call me and let me know if you're interested, and I need you to have a sign of release. And that actually happens. And the heir finders end up getting a fee. It's kind of like a finder's fee, and it's usually about 1/3. So, but you as an heir, it's kind of unfound. It's lost money that just comes to fruition. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fraud out there too. There are some legitimate businesses that do this for a living, but that's why if you ever get a letter like that, never jump into it and make the call. Never just say, "Oh my God, my ship has finally come in." It's always good to contact either somebody at the Council on Aging, certainly a local attorney, and sometimes the police department, to find out. So, and certainly like the Attorney General's office has a great fraud prevention unit in at the AG's office. But there are a lot of legitimate businesses. That's how they earn their living. They hunt the heirs down, and they share in the profit.
Yeah.
So.
when you say profit, I'm going to use myself as an example. And I have a very large collection of old cars. Now, I'm not talking the 1920s or anything, but I'm talking like 1950s, 1960s. And to me, I mean, that's well over 70 years ago. But these are all cars that I grew up with.
Sure.
So I have like all these models that I have collected. So to me, you know, it's something that I have that I enjoy. I enjoy looking at them because they remind me when I was back in the 50s, back in the 60s, all these old cars, and you don't see them on the road today. Today it's all the modern cars. So when you say, when you talk about profit, then does somebody take, like, somebody come in here and take all my old cars and put money to them and then divvy out the money? Usually, or would they give the cars to see somebody?
Well, if you don't have a will, and usually whoever gets appointed as the personal representative needs to be somebody within your family or something like that. And unless they share your passion for the cars, normally there's probably a cost to maintain them and a cost to store them someplace. So they're going to start bleeding. So at the end of the day, most people are going to liquidate the assets, as they call it. So they will sell off any assets of the estate. And when it comes down to the end of the day, then whatever the money that comes in from the sale and the liquidation of the assets then goes out to the heirs as distribution. So that's why the will is important, because if you knew somebody, whether it's a family member or a friend or even a museum, for instance, that would find extraordinary value, just like you do, it might not be a like you say, profit or a financial value, but a sentimental one. On that particular topic, that's when a will is important, because you want what your cherished possessions are to go to either an individual, a charity, maybe a museum, that you know other people would have that sense of value just like you do. But otherwise, if you don't have a will, it gets very cold, and people are just going to liquidate the assets, get the money, distribute it to whoever your heirs are. We talk about this. So I'm running for sheriff this fall in an election. So my dad, back in the late 70s, maybe early 80s, was a big campaign supporter of former Sheriff Cliff Marshall. He was a sheriff in Norfolk County for a number of years. And Sheriff Marshall would deputize some of his most valuable supporters. And he'd have this annual breakfast, and he'd give everybody a sheriff's deputy badge, a nice little badge, and you can put it in your wallet. And so my father cherished the darn thing. It was awesome. It was a nice little thing. And so when he passed away, we knew how much it was sentimental to him. So I know he wanted two things to be properly displayed. One was his Knights of Columbus paraphernalia, his Knights of Columbus rosary beads, but he also wanted that badge displayed prominently because he was darn proud of it. So when it was time to go for the funeral and we were, the family was gathered around, and it was just my brother and I and our immediate family. And the funeral director, who's a friend of mine, comes over and says, "Okay, we're gonna now head to the funeral home." I said, "Ed, before we stop this stuff, I want all the Knights of Columbus stuff, and I want that darn sheriff's badge, And so nothing was going to be buried with my father. And to this day, and I didn't expect to be telling this story. There it is. Wow. That's my dad's Norfolk County Deputy Sheriff's badge.
Wow.
So I've had that on me since he passed away in 2008. And little did I know that I'd be running for Norfolk County Sheriff in the fall of 2020.
Maybe you can put it on, Pat.
I already have the badge, so I just need the job. Okay?
That's great. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Carrie.
No, thank you so much. It's always so insightful, and it sounds to me like the bottom line is make sure you have a will.
Make sure you have a will.
I'm gonna work on that.
Get her on the phone. She'll take care of you. So no, this is a lot of fun. I appreciate this. That it's it's an opportunity. I mean, it's an odd environment to connect, but it is fun. I can see everybody. I can peer into your households. I can see your little pictures and the decor on the walls and all that. It's become kind of this fashionable thing on Zoom calls, because now technically, I don't know if you on Zoom you can determine how you watch the screen. Now, right now, I'm seeing everybody on the screen, but in some Zoom calls, like you can click. Now, if I can click on Laurel here, let me see if it allows me to do it. Oh no, see, the administrator must have it set up that I can't get I can't click on. So when you're on a Zoom call, sometimes you can double click on somebody and you can kind of check out their house.
Oh.
So, but it's always fun. So it's, whoops, did I lose you? Hold on. The other thing you got to make sure, this is a little, I hope you guys have Zoom lessons for everybody. So the other thing you can do on Zoom, which is kind of cool, you can create your own virtual background.
Oh.
Which is exactly what I have.
That's what Jerry's got going on up there, see?
Jerry's in the Bahamas.
Here it is. See?
I'm in the
On
Bahamas.
political calls. So, but no, it's fun. So I hope that we'll be able to get out of this, sooner than later, and that we'll be back at the Council on Aging, hanging out, and as soon as possible. Coffee and donuts are on me. Okay.
And amen to that, because I missed my pool days.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank
Okay,
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much,
Very
Catherine.
much.
Thanks, Marianne. Good to see everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.
Okay.